law. We were hoping to get it to the Supreme Court, but they said no recently. And then we also are tackling on, if folks don't know about, some of the reduction in city funding, through like the Headley Amendment, trying to make sure we're following the constitutional formula for that. But on the other end, they hired me to come in and do work around the community benefits movement. And this is going to give you a little bit of taste of what, not only in Detroit, but Somerville, Massachusetts, St. Louis, Chicago just recently called and said they were going to do an ordinance as well. And everybody's coming up with different ways, but the whole idea is around getting a seat at the table. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the community benefits movement is national. Right now, most of the community benefits agreements, they're contracts where there's a third signatory line, that's what we count it as, and the community coalition organization gets to sign on with the developer and the city. So there's 3 people that have rights under the contract. And most of those CBAs that you see here around the country, they're mostly were entered voluntarily in private. Some of them are really strong, and some of them are like, things that they sometimes are already doing and just for show. But just to get a sense, so you guys know that these are some of the. And then I do this part, it's not that important. The one thing I do show, though, is this is Canada. This is the new bridge, Gordie Howe Bridge. And this is like Detroit. Community benefits is part of the process as the Canadians move forward with the legislation and to authorize the bridge, where we don't do that in the U.S. We kind of like, here's a study, yeah, we need a new bridge. It kind of sits around for a little bit, and then they get it authorized, but then they talk about community benefits later. Here they got $2 billion in community benefits. Most of it's green space. They even got some stuff to save some snakes. And no, I'm being serious, and like, I got nothing, so it's all concrete, and I had aerial shots, but I think I left them in landscape. So some of the examples that I show is the Twitter one in San Francisco, and there they got, Twitter at that time got, I think, $70 million in tax exemption for their payroll tax. So in this essence, what the city council and folks push for is saying, hey, we're giving you this for 6 years. In exchange, we would like $3 million each year during the time that they're getting the tax break to go to Neighborhood Learning Center. They're also doing $3 million each year for local nonprofits. Some of the other thing is, which I like, is the $500,000 per year for small businesses. So they have to contract with small businesses in the area. That's really cool. In Pittsburgh, it's a Penguins, it's a stadium. This is something we were hoping to get with Little Caesars Arena. In this case, they got $1 million in the district where they're hosting it for a grocery store. They also got a First Source Employment Center. What I love about that is, like right now, Olympia Entertainment, who's running Little Caesars, they'll have like a job fair at one of our rec centers in the city, and it's just, all the hundreds of people show up. And that's it. You just pile on the apps and then they take off. Where this is a permanent center where people come in, they can help with resumes, they can help people, it's something, so there's almost like this extension of their HR department as well as the stadium. So that kind of gives you a sense of some examples. Others that I liked were the National Ice Arena Center. There I like because they got 1% of the revenue up to $25 million. That's really cool. You rarely will see that. And they even had 10,000 per year. It's crazy, it's only 10,000. I'm like, is that like 5 people? But 10,000 per year to train local residents. And I think it's kind of hard to read. And energy generation systems. And I looked at all of them. So community benefits agreements, you're going to hear people like your city council members or other folks say, oh, we're doing a CBA. Then you kind of dig and you're like, oh, it's a memo. Or it's a letter of interest. And so the way to kind of try to seek out, because they are now hijacking the term a lot, is these are the 3 principles. Is the community representation in the negotiation process? Is it resulting in a binding agreement? What I mean by that is, can we go to court? And then, of course, enforceable by the community. So in the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're like, it's enforceable, and there was a negotiation process and so forth. But in that case, they don't get access to the courts. They only could do mediation. So just to kind of give you a sense of flavor, and I'm not dissing it. What I'm trying to say is you might end up settling for that, or might think that might be okay for depending on your relationship or history with the developer. But these are the three areas that we stick to. Now, in St. Louis, there's two competing community benefits ordinance, where you have one city council person that introduced one that says he will negotiate it. That's not community representation negotiating process. So, yeah, it's crazy over there right now. I can't believe they had 28 council members there. Did you know that? For like 300,000 people. We have 600,000 people in the city of Detroit, and we have 9. And no, and then Chicago has like 50. Like, I'm learning a lot as I'm talking to them. I'm like, don't you guys ever attend? They're like, Rashida, we have 50. Like, we don't know who to talk to. And then what I always talk about, because a lot of people will say community benefits agreements are just about jobs. And they used to be really critical about creating jobs, right, Ben? I mean, this was all about, like, LAX airport was expanding, so, like, how many percentage of that should go to, like, the trades folks? How many of us can need to engage of those folks? But now community benefits agreements are much broader. For some, it's about truck routes, relocation. That was huge for us in Southwest Detroit with the new bridge. Access to affordable housing, which is a huge one right now in the Boston area. They're working on a CBA ordinance. Public transportation, support for small businesses have been really, that's some way of showing that people that are fighting for community benefits is not anti-business. We're like really for small business communities. And FYI, in Michigan, the Small Business Association, I think, claims that small business in Michigan is 500 employees or less. You know the difference, like what I'm trying, yeah, so I'm not gonna do this part. Well, one of the things that you're gonna hear people's attack on community benefits is, you know, we got it, don't worry about it, because a lot of our cities obviously do development agreements. The problem with development agreements is, you know, we need to rely on the political courage of our city to actually go and hold them accountable to whatever they promised in exchange for tax breaks or public subsidy. Sometimes it's just land, y'all, or sometimes it's zoning, changing the zoning, and that triggers us saying, well, wait, you're getting a public benefit, like, what are we getting in return to show some sort of balance, or what we call win-win? And so I always say mayors and city council members come and go, but neighborhoods don't. So us being signatories on these agreements are really critical. If we have to pay, we should have a say. That came from you guys. We love that one. Okay, so, and some of the things too is like, you know, in being an elected official, I had to deal with a lot, mostly men, with the big egos is like, you know, oh, Rashida, we got this, you know, I'm gonna come in here and do this. I said, you know, we all had a chance, and the city did, under their Detroit Economic Growth Corp, or maybe in Lansing, it's a different group. They tried to take that approach of doing it in-house, and it just didn't work. And so I always say, you know, you had your chance, now the community's turn to have a seat at the table to help ensure equity, real true equity. So I always show this example. I used to live up until a year ago, literally less than a mile. I could see the Marathon oil refinery. It's the only petroleum refinery in the state. And they got a $175 million tax abatement for 100 jobs. And the city council approved it. And at that time, we had it was before bankruptcy. Our city council was like, and anytime anybody said jobs, council was like, come on, please come. You know, I was like, is it permanent jobs? Is it this, you know? So they promised 100 jobs in exchange for $175 million. We got an audit, thank God, and they looked into it and found out we only got 15 of those jobs. So that's about $11 million per job. And no one had the courage, because the state had to get involved, to claw back. That would have been a great example of accountability and showing, like, if they did that, we probably would have never really start pushing for the community benefits ordinance. I always show this too at the foot of the Ambassador Bridge, which now I live near. Maddie Moon's really happy about that. But as you can see, and I always show, and I'm going to change it, I'm going to show Port Huron versus this, and showing how, because Port Huron actually got a community benefits package, not an agreement, but a package for relocation, all this other stuff, and it's beautiful. It's all this green space. I mean, people can play frisbee underneath it, and it's very integrated into the community. Where here, it's completely separate, almost like an island. That's it before I have Miguel come. Yeah, I know. I was like trying to read because I feel so bad. Does anybody have any questions for me before I have Miguel come up and talk about our experience in Detroit? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I talked to a few people in developers specifically who have mentioned that their problem will be finding financing from banks if there is potential of a clawback. Do you have you heard that a lot? What is your response to that?
Well, they always say there's a legal issue or whatever. First of all, most of them are getting financing based on our backs. So like TIFAs or tax increments or any of those, actually they bond based on our money and everything. If you look at I always call them, you can just, for community members without titles or people that, it's basically tax schemes that have been set up with our public dollars. And so for us, that alone, I mean, the bank knows that's the investment from the community. If they don't want to take the risk or don't feel like, because for us, we think the bank is already giving the money because they're getting it from us. I mean, literally, we're the bank. And they're bonding on it, they're loaning on it, whatever it is. Then they shouldn't get in the corporate welfare line and go get it financing on their own. So I know that's a really harsh position to take, but you should know they sign contracts every day. And like I told Dan Gilbert's lobbyist, I'm like, Jared, it's $5 million, put it aside for VOTEC and Detroit Public Schools. It's already money committed that you all put separate. It doesn't even have to be tied to the project. Does that make sense? So it's not like you're gonna do this, whatever. So the clawback, honestly, would be maybe, we say with $5 million, if you don't follow it, then we're gonna cut off any future, whatever the accountability measure is. But I have yet to really believe that argument. They have yet to show me a bank's not gonna do, not is gonna be worried about clawback. And they should be more, I mean, it's the risk they're gonna take, and that to me is the accountability measure. I mean, they're taking our public dollars and we need it in return. So, and I can help you, I'll leave my number, coming up with a better argument, because I know every project's gonna be very specific. There's gonna be the ones doing the housing and their financial mechanism. I bet you a clawback thing in there is not gonna be, it's going to incentivize them. If it is an issue, it's going to incentivize them to stick to what they promised. And nobody's putting a gun to their head, people. Like, no, I promise you, like, whatever they're going to put on paper is going to be stuff they know they can afford. And we're not crazy. We're not asking for golf courses, not even grocery stores. It's very rare that they're grocery. By the way, the city primarily paid for that. But it's like, these are things like truck routes, or in some cases in Lansing, it could be like making sure there's an advisory council with as many renters versus low income versus, you know what I mean? Sure. So that seat at the table and that accessibility is important. And it's also changing the culture in your city and saying, if you're gonna get in the corporate welfare line, this is what to expect. But no, I've yet to really believe the clawback or the legal, like, oh, you're gonna get sued. I said, you can get sued by the contractors. You can get sued by all kinds of people. I hope you budget for it. If you don't think you're gonna file, and trust me, they insure themselves. They have, so, I mean, it's just so exaggerated, but go ahead.
So you're saying that's a national movement. Are all the communities working on this kind of starting from scratch, or are they using these on some kind of oil or
Yeah, so a lot of them are what is, like in Chicago, they had this one project that happened, and there was this agreement, I think it was like a memo, and it just didn't follow through. Just like for us, it was Marathon, and then it was also another it was the arena. They were supposed to, they get 30%, they were supposed to hire 51%, it didn't. So a lot of it was triggered in more reaction to the broken promises of the city development agreements. Where at the time your city council and your mayor probably thought, oh yeah, they're gonna follow through on this or whatever. And so they did a meeting like this. I did one in Somerville, and then in St. Louis, an internal one, and then we did a much broader one. But it was all around specific projects that people were thinking about when they were trying to put this together. And the one thing I told them is you create a structure to have this as a process, but you don't have to actually know what's going to go in the agreement. Does that make sense? So you're creating a structure and saying, okay, if you are, the public subsidy is this amount, or maybe it's around geographic, like Chicago wants to base it only in a certain geographic area as a trigger area, then this just FYI as notice that you will have to negotiate a community benefits process, and this is what it looks like, but it doesn't, for our ordinance in Detroit, we just said, we want you to talk about education. You may talk, use the word may, talk about education, small business. So we just did like what I call chapter titles, but not necessarily talking specifics like percentages or any of that, because we feel like each developer is going to want to put forward something different. But they really was more reactionary and started exploring, like, you know, for Somerville, Massachusetts, it was about the fact that their community was getting gentrified. And for folks in St. Louis, it's similar tensions between the city politics and the community on the direction of the city. But I don't know if I answered your question. So there was a small work group in Ypsilanti where they had we had a city councilwoman who was going to introduce the ordinance, and then a law department person that they hired as their lawyer, I think, to come in to work with me and others, and then they brought in a few other people from the community. And now we're at a work group coming up with what they think would be good for Ypsilanti.
So this kind of one, just hearing the group of people actually turn the village around.
Yeah. Work groups are, you know, when I say work group, they're not going to be, I mean, these are really incredible opportunities to kind of engage. So what we did in Southwest Detroit is we brought in folks that we knew could do housing in Detroit. We brought in folks that we knew can give us expertise on diesel retrofitting and those kinds of areas, just to be able to come up with language and saying, you know, if you're going to do community benefits agreement, this is, you know, you need to deal with air quality based on this or something like that, but not specifics. It was helpful. And then we had the Small Business Association come in and talk about, one of the things that they taught us was some of these large scale projects are too large for some of the small business landscaping companies and so forth, is to require in a CBA of looking into cutting them up a little bit more so that they can give it to small businesses. Yeah.
Do you have any experience of transplanting this into hospital systems? So larger hospital systems out of state coming in and taking over more nonprofits.
Yeah, so hospitals are interesting because they're considered nonprofit. So in some cases, you had universities in Columbia University expanding and other areas. That one, the CBA was fantastic, but it didn't hit the ground fast enough. There's been hits and misses with it, but, you know, I mean, they only got $300,000 the first year. I'm like, are you crazy? As soon as they announced it, the prices of the home, everything went up. But to go to your question about that is so you're saying if somebody is coming, like a hospital is coming from outside to come and develop here, are they getting some sort of public subsidy? Or what I mean public subsidy is, are they getting a tax break? Are they getting land for half of that? Okay. Yeah, you would treat them just as if they were a for-profit. It doesn't matter. I mean, your trigger for us in Detroit, our trigger is if they got $300,000 or more in tax breaks. And ours wasn't, you know, people are like, that's so low. They're like, it has to be a $15 million project or more. So we combined it in that sense. So again, it depends. What we did is we had our economic growth folks give us the last 20 years, like all of the projects, and we averaged the tax breaks, which were about $8 million, I think. So the project's costs were $8 million, and then what the average was for tax breaks. So, but Henry Ford Health System, they're in negotiation now with, and they've been, and you should see, I wrote it. I don't know, are you part of Henry Ford? Because I wrote it. And they're not even asking very much. They're asking just for the application as they come in from the zip code around Henry Ford Hospital to be singled out, just like marked, so they get some sort of high priority or something like that if something comes up, which is not very much, but whatever. I want to get.
Thank you. I'm actually on Lansing City Council.
Oh, great.
In Washington. This is a huge issue for me.
It's a legacy issue for our council president.
We give
And the city's taking up so much risk
Oh,
in doing it,
yeah,
because if the projects fail, it's on us.
and they tell us, oh, this is gonna keep or bring 250 jobs. And
Right.
No, it's always very sexy, yeah.
Yeah.
And then nobody ever audits it, and
Right.
because we have a strong meter system, it's actually incumbent on the mayor, unless we want to get law involved. And we try to,
Oh, yeah,
some of my
Duggan
friends
was there.
back here, we try to get a bidder ordinance where they would have to at least allow our local labor to at least apply for the jobs. Not saying we had to give them the jobs, not saying in the community, we couldn't get that for the household. I mean,
That's
it's-
mostly like the pieces of a CBA was
Yeah,
like.
it's so discouraging. So.
How about start with just say, okay, anybody in the, getting a tax breaker or some sort of project, that they have to pay for an audit.
But you know what? We have to have 5 people to vote for it. And this is where it is critically important.
Because that's the way you say, oh, you don't want an audit, do you not want to?
You know, because if we can't get 5 votes, it's not going anywhere. And the development agreement is the same thing.
Are you able to, Councilwoman, are you able to go to any city department director and have them pull some of the one?
No, ma'am, because those department heads are told not to talk to council.
Got it.
So we are not allowed to
Yeah.
talk to.
Daddy Duggan does stuff like that.
This will change shortly. And, but I just, like I said, I have to go, but, I guess I want to know how this works. Is this, are you talking about a community group gets together and puts pressure on council, which I welcome?
It's a combination, yeah. It's a combination. So in our case, we had 2 allies on city council that we knew of. And council president at that time, she was just a regular member. She worked with us for like 2 or 4 years almost. And you know, what we tried to do is get get Henry Ford and the Illiches and Gilberts to do it voluntarily by saying, well, Council President Jones thinking, and it didn't work.
Right.
So she introduced it. It was her #1 priority issue, and she had one other colleague. And so when she did it, it became an organizing tool.
You're killing me for the chamber of investment in time.
I know. The thing about it is, I think you underestimate how much they need you and how much credibility you're going to get from the community when the chamber doesn't endorse you. The problem, and then also it depends. Like, you know, I don't know. I personally, like, Maddie Maroon tried to recall me because I didn't like, you know. Well, no, he was building the bridge without permits, and he got mad because I got John Diggle to get us a U.S. Coast Guard hearing, because we usually don't do that. And so I was trying to go around not having to introduce legislation, trying to do it that way, and trying to do it community, just to organize the community. And they actually ended up suspending his permit, and he was just so livid. And so what I'm trying to say is that there's a combination. I think you being at the table when they are coming up with organizing ways to organize them. Like for us, I mean, Progress Michigan really helped us because we had Engage Michigan. We ended up doing like cute little buttons and sayings and like visualizing it for a lot of residents. So like now, I mean, we're actually shocked how many people know what a community benefits agreement is in Detroit. Like we're like shocked. I was at some church meeting, someone was like, if they're gonna do that, we need a community benefits agreement. I'm like, you know. So, yeah, and it will take some time, but I think it's accountability, so.
A lot of
Yeah.
money off from us.
Yeah.
And we can't even get them to do the smallest things. We have Kelly Dean, who is a philanthropist, and has done quite a bit with the promise. So
Yeah.
we also got the busing contract away from union employees. So I don't know
Right.
if that was just self-beneficial. But
Well,
they're not doing
yeah.
anything to help
What helped us
and
is
they
getting
don't live here.
examples of where they didn't stick to their promise, showing the broken promises. So it'd be really good to try to get some examples or some sort of way to figure out. And the way to do it is maybe you ask Sugar Law to FOIA the city instead of, you know, we FOIA the city on behalf of Ben, and we say these are what we want, and that's how you can get it. You can get around all that.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming.
Any other? I saw somebody over here. Yes, sir.
I wonder if you looked into.
You guys can turn the lights on.
I wonder if
I'm
you
like
looked
falling
into
asleep.
downtown development.
It's very romantic, Ben.
If you look at the DDA, the Downtown Development Authority, the state law, we have this problem in our town
Yeah.
where these deals were made,
Uh-huh.
overbuilt 3 hotels, and huge parking structure in addition to the strip mall. And the township is now going to face potential insolvency.
Mhm.
These deals may go down.
That's a good example.
When the Lansing State Journal did their expose over a Sunday and then the rest of the week, they went very deeply into how these deals were structured to benefit the developers, and in ways that are almost scandalous when you read the detail. But by the time this newspaper reporting came out, these deals were all locked in.
Yeah.
And Lansing Township was actually to the point of not putting out enough police and fire, not being able to read.
No,
And so
it
they
bleeds
were-
out our general service. So they all will continue to tell you, but we're generating taxes, we're generating income tax, but at the same time, they don't understand it's taxes we're not collecting for 20 years or whatever it is, and it's only going towards, well, they get the little geographic area and they said, okay, all the taxes in this area would just go in this area to build. Like right now, it kills me to see him tearing down historic houses, Chris Illich, and putting parking lots. By the way, you're gonna notice $40 to park downtown. That never, I mean, the most I ever saw growing up was like $20, $25, now it's $40. And it says Olympia Entertainment, and yeah, and I'm thinking $40, give us our money back, or like, you know, like that's a lot of cars, like a lot of cars can fit in there, it's unbelievable. Anyways, that's a great example.
So the reason I'm asking is we had a city council race where it was throw the bombs out because we had so many tax incentives. And then we had 3 failed developments, and so our flagship.
So you guys have some
Lansing
things.
is this strange thing to
Yeah.
put together wrong. And the lesson that ties the two together seems to be that the deal was structured by the developer, and for whatever reason, the municipality didn't understand that they were set up to be the loser. There were all kinds of risks that were.
No, it's the risks, it's not really sad, but we take on so much more of the risk. Like they even get their own insurance. They have their own insurance on their development and stuff.
So we had all these leaders, people in the community who invested an enormous amount of time to educate the community to not give out these deals.
Yeah.
Well, then the new people were elected, and they said, we can't develop our downtown without giving away tax
Yeah.
subsidies. And what
It's
seems
hard to compete
What
with.
seems to be missing is the expertise to have somebody there on behalf of the citizens to help the council articulate people's demands at the level at which the developers are dealing. So we had one person running for a school board who said, other states have solved this in the area that I'm an expert in, which is how to finance schools and build school buildings. And he came in with all this data on the states that have a statewide entity that helps you negotiate all your contracts for every school building in every district. And they give you that expertise. So my question is simply, has any state done this where they provide?
I have to look, but
It
they,
seems like you
so
need to
we used to
level
have, in Detroit, we used to have these things called, Miguel, you got on top of it, citizens district councils. So any development that went through that had federal dollars attached to it, which most of them did, we ended up, they would have to get clearance from that community district council, who may or may not have some of the expertise and background before they actually could proceed.
Good point. So one of the things that a question that was asked, and I didn't quite hear the question, but I'll answer the question someone asked me on the sideline
Introduce
is,
yourself, sorry.
I'm Miguel, I'm from Detroit, I'm from a citizen, People's Platform, and we're a community organization that does justice work in the city of Detroit. But one of the questions that was asked, which may tie into the question that's kind of on the floor, is what determines the community? And you have folk who are sitting at the table who have a project who says the community boundaries are here. But I live on the other side of the expressway or the other side of the street, and how have you arbitrarily drawn this line to determine this is community? And so that's where organizations like People's Platform in Detroit come in and say, do you think you're part of the community that this project is in? Does this impact you where you live at, where you play at, where you work at, where your kids live at, where your kids play at, where your kids go to school? So this definition of community is sort of fluid in the community's mind, but in the developer's mind, it has some very clear boundaries. So the community has to push back and say, that's right across the street from me, you drew the boundary down the middle of the street. I'm exaggerating a bit. So you have to rally the community folk to say, wait a minute, I have something to say about this. Whether you consider me part of your community or not, I consider this part of my community. And that's what is really important. It takes a lot of work to rally folks and get them charged up about the things that are going on right in front of their house. I can speak from the CBA, so the project in my neighborhood, who's been to Detroit? And they have a thing there called the DeQuinder Cut. Everybody know that?
The what?
DeQuinder Cut.
Okay.
It's a really cool bike trail that sort of subgrade the street and people ride, but they're putting one right in front of my house, which is a really cool thing. So that's definitely in my community. But as this thing starts to come to the neighborhood, I'm going out, I'm a community leader in Detroit, about 30 square blocks in the area that I really work in. And so I'm getting people to understand, what does this mean if this happens here for you 5 blocks over? Do you still consider yourself part of the community that this project is in? What happens when this thing builds up and they start putting parking lots here or there, where the traffic becomes so great that it starts to impact how you get home and how you do things? So we do have to have a little bit of a conversation with projects and groups about what are you considering community? And that you can't have these straight lines that demarcate your project as being here or here. Does that kind of answer your question a little? I see you have this look on your face.
Well, it's good to have a third person at the table. Who determines who's sitting at the table?
Good point. And that is,
Every community decides the different structures of that.
and the city has manipulated, Detroit, the city has manipulated that. One of the projects
Orchestrated.
that she talked about where you have these citizens councils for projects specifically, the city was doing,
Neighborhood advisory.
the city advisory councils. And so they had a project where they said, we're going to talk about the project in general. And when folk got there, it turned out they were actually electing members to sit on the council. So that speaks to something going on over here. These secret meetings that I heard you talking about from the floor, things are going on way before we get to the point of talking about it. So the community has to start saying, I'll give you an example. One of the meetings that I was at, I didn't share this meeting, but the city came with a bunch of PowerPoints, a bunch of stuff, and they were trying to talk and say, we're going to do this over here, and the community member stood up and said, that's not what we want. And every time we go to talk, they say, that's not what we want. When did you have this meeting? And so community really can start to impact stuff, and I like this example because when they show up with PowerPoints with things that they say, here's what we want to do, it's almost a done deal. But you have to have community members that are strong enough to say, we don't care how much money you spent on that plan and how long it took you to get it, we don't want that unless you talk to us. We might want it after we talk about it. But you've got to do things correctly. You've got to talk to us first before you do this plan and roll it out. And so I think with groups like this, if you're figuring out how to gain momentum, you've got to get people in the community and in the streets to say, I don't like that. They got to make phone calls to people. And this issue of the third party is, so when they show up in meeting, that who are you? You don't live in my neighborhood. They've got to push back to the entities that put that person in that position. And that takes a lot of work. One of the things that I could imagine, I'm not sure about here in Lansing, and I've been here doing some stuff, so I don't know if this actually exists. In many of the areas where a lot of these developments are going on, there are folk who have been disenfranchised for whatever reason. And we're talking economically and socially. And so the reality of the development is that if I'm standing on someone's porch and I'm saying, I need you to come to a meeting to protest or to talk about, and the person is saying, well, I got 3 kids here. I don't have time to do that. Or, you know what, they're about to turn my electricity and my water off. I don't have time, I'm trying to figure out how to get money, and there's a lot of other stuff in the community that is kind of conflicting with these conversations that we have about development. While I understand it's very important that this thing is going on right in front of my house, I can't figure out how to make it important because of the things that are going on inside my house or inside my family. That makes sense? And I'm not sure if this is kind of what you came to hear, but in terms of the community development piece, I think you got to take all these things into consideration. It's not always a person being apathetic or lazy when they don't respond the way that you want them to. You've got to figure out, how do you make this thing so compelling that this person will say, yeah, I'll do that, or I'll make a phone call for you. And so as activists and community organizers and people doing things in government, you have to understand lots of different ways to get support. I don't always need you to be standing with me, but if you make a phone call for me or you write a letter for me, so you have to start figuring out what are those things that you're going to have to do to rally people around the project that you see as being very important here in Lansing and East Lansing. Does that make sense? Any questions for me?
Well, give an example of that particular measure. You, for example, a neighborhood association.
Yes.
They represent the community and a block of vote. So if you're dealing with council members or any other politician, you couldn't caucus that association.
Yeah, this is interesting. I'm glad you said that. So I'm a president of an organization called Mount Ida Business Community Association. We started off as 2 blocks, and now it's actually 30 blocks. And here's, when we were 2 blocks only, the city thought we were this huge organization. Because people would always say, make sure you talk to those people in MEPCA because we didn't. We were just a few people who spoke loud and made stuff happen. And so now that we're 30 blocks, we can call and say, this is MEPCA calling, and people take our calls. And so I think that you can start to build equity and build alliances very small. And so it doesn't have to be these big things. You're exactly right. Starting at the community level, starting with 1 block, 1 street, whatever, that really helps quite a bit. Yes, sir.
How long has it been since?
How long what?
How long has it been since? Exciting people.
You said how long was the canvas effort?
The door-to-door program.
It was a relatively short period of time. And so there's 2 things that happened. So we actually collected 9,000 signatures initially to get it on the ballot. And if you all studying this, I'm going to guess something we... Okay, so we did it as a ballot initiative, got 9,000 signatures, which were all valid. The city pushed back and said, not legally. They said, yes, it is, after they sent it to the legal department. So in that effort of doing all that door knocking, getting signatures, we had people all across the city of Detroit. And so I believe that was less than 2 months when we actually started doing that.
Our ordinance sat in the subcommittee for 2 years. Refused to.
Oh, that book in here.
Yeah, refused to even have a hearing on it, or they will pull it up and then send it back to the law department, and within 29 days, we collected 3%. It was about, I want to say 6,000 actually signatures, and we had over 35. They were valid, and we got it on the ballot. The only other way to get a ballot initiative on the Detroit ballot is through a resolution through council. So Councilman Benson called it the same thing and put another one on there that was pretty misleading. It's not real, it wasn't binding, it didn't have, and then, somebody asked about, he created a structure where council appointed this many and all this, and it's very orchestrated. They're only required to have 1 meeting, something crazy like that, where ours was reasonable time, within a certain period of time and so forth. We didn't have any structure there, but Somerville, Massachusetts is doing this thing where they're saying, okay, there's going to be 9 people that are going to be the negotiating body, 2 have to be renters, 2 have to be 120% poverty rate, that way, so we can really keep, because what was happening, and I went to one where the Pistons facility, practice facility, all these women showed up. They all lived in the same condo facility in the New Center area. And they were all notified, but Ms. Robbins, who's in her 70s, lived in the West Grand Boulevard area forever. And her and her husband never got notified at the meeting, because at the first meeting, that's where you nominate somebody to get on And then the things that got into the agreement were things that the Detroit Pistons were already doing. Very broad, and already they were if you went to the website, you'd see a copy.
So I think we really have to encourage people to get out and not be afraid to say that's not right and follow through with it. I'm going to use an example of a project that was in Detroit. There was a Durfee School. It was a large complex in Detroit which had an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school on a campus. Beautiful space. The elementary school closed several years ago. Middle school is still active. A group called Life Remodel came in and got a lease for the building for $1 a year for 30 years, renewable for 90 years total. The community said, you didn't talk to us about this project. And I'm saying this because I want you to understand what community can do. So Life Remodel stepped into the room and said, we have a lease for this building for the next 90 years for $1 a year. Here's what we want to do for the community. So what was the response of the community?
It's not about what we want for us, it's what we want for you. I hope.
Good, keep going. You're on the right road. So what does a lease mean, first of all? It means you've met with someone, you've agreed, you've signed it, it's a legally binding what? Contract. Guess what happened? This group stepped forward and said, this is not going to happen. And through a set of a lot of meetings and a lot of pushback, that contract was torn up. And the person, and I may be exaggerating this a bit, but the person from Life Remodel kind of stepped in the room and said, well, you know, it's a done deal, there's nothing I can really do. We should have done this differently at first. We should have came to the community and said, here's what we want to do, but we're here now, so let's move forward. And the community said, you should just tear this thing up. Tear it up and start over if you really mean this. And when they were adamant and said, we're not going to do that, they pushed back, community pushed back and got that thing torn up. So community is real important with the kind of work that I hear you all talking about doing. You've got to get folk on the ground excited and passionate about this stuff. But you do have to help them understand, what does this look like 5 years down the road if this continues to go unchecked? And a good example, I go to Toronto, I do a lot of community work there. There's a project in Toronto, the name escapes me, but there's Cabbagetown. Everybody know Cabbagetown? It's an area that's been gentrified, like New Center. There's an area just outside of Cabbagetown which is not developed, and they have tried to do their best to keep developers from coming in there. And they've gone to their affluent neighbors and say, help us out. And so in an area not too far, there's a high-rise building that pays a lot of money for the view. A developer came in and built a building that obliterated the view that they've been paying for, and they're saying, we need some help because we don't think this is right, and they're reaching out to the community that came to them and said, will you support us? Well, you weren't supporting us when you thought that we were just folk that didn't have resources. And so this community that I'm talking about now is actually staving off the developers in their community because they know what to do now. When they ask for help, they didn't get it. So you got to help people understand that you can push back, you can fight back, and there isn't a way to agree. There is a way to have an equitable agreement between all the partners. But it takes giving a little bit here, giving a little bit there, and both people saying, are we making decisions for the common good? And that is a really big, big discussion that you have to have a certain way to discuss that and say, what does this look like? The Native Americans have this thing of 7 generations. How does this impact 7 generations? And so if we start looking at development from that perspective, what is this thing you're doing right now today? How will my children's children be impacted by this thing that you're doing? Does that sound like a strategy that might get people involved or engaged? And so one of the things I do really believe is that right now, a lot of people really are living in the moment. And we don't always think about next year or even next month for that case. So this development piece that People Platform does is looking at justice issues and having people understand that how does this impact you today, but what does it mean for your children? And if we don't start standing up now, people are going to run over us. Okay? Right, exactly. Any other questions for me? I'm not exactly sure if I covered everything or kind of things that we were.
I got a question. If you're not familiar with the city, we're on the east side, and on the east side we have predominantly one developer that owns the entire kind of main drag through the east side. As much as our city councilors say they're not doing what they should, they're going to say this and doing another thing, every time they come with a handout, we still give them a crown, we're still doing tips.
Right.
It's not so dull. So I guess this specific developer is on the record saying, we were doing this almost out of philanthropy. We could go to DeWitt, we could go to Grand Ledge. So I assume with the 2 different community benefit proposals that you guys are dealing with in Detroit, you got a lot of, from the other side, from the more moderate community benefit ordinance, you got a lot of, we want to bring business in, this is going to
Yes.
keep, this is going to expel them.
Yes.
because community benefit agreements go back to the 90s, maybe a little bit before that, is there research to show to back this up? What are your general thoughts on this?
One of my first thoughts as you started talking is, I'm never afraid to say no. We don't want that. Even if it does, I use the example of, oh my goodness, the Trojan horse. Beautiful gift. A lot of people accept it. Some people say we don't want it, but the folk who matter say, yeah, bring it on in. And once they got in there, oh man, we made a mistake. And so I think that you have to, it looks good, but let's talk about this a lot more before we make this decision. So the issue between the proposal A and the proposal B, there were a lot of people saying, yeah, it's going to keep some jobs from coming here. That's okay. The jobs that do come here, we want to make sure.
Well, I think when people say that, you don't say it's okay.
No, no.
I would say, but currently, current status, the way it's working out, 60% of the people that live in the city of Detroit work outside of the city. 70% that work in the city of Detroit do not live in the city. That alone says the status quo doesn't work. So a lot of people that in Lansing are going to get involved in this movement, you got to show them the broken promises. You got to show them that it's not working out. That's how you get people involved. People in my neighborhood and stuff are more reactive. Like, so if I'm like, do you see what Maryland did? Do you see what they did? And it's because we don't have a seat at the table. And so it is important for you all to get the research, get those examples of these quasi-governmental authorities that are really robbing our schools, our hospitals. I mean, to me, what Oakland, California did, they actually said no to a developer. And they waited, and yeah, people were like, I can't believe you did this. And labor was at the table, and they said no. You're like, no, I don't want you. And I'll send it to Ben, but I can send it to all of you. But it was a fantastic example of the fact that they got somebody that fully funded the project, created the same job, similar amounts of jobs and everything. And it was better for the community because they just were saying no to the large tax rates in exchange for another stadium. So I know it was some building.
Yeah, I think I was actually going down that road, but what I want to say is that,
I just want you guys to know people have said no, and it was, we don't say no enough, and we raise the bar of what we want as a community and our expectations.
I was going to say is, so there's nothing wrong with holding out for what you want. And sometimes that means that you say no. And then you come back and what is the further conversation we have to have? And then you structure that conversation. And so I had a conversation in Nashville with a group that was doing some similar work. And we brought both groups to the table and said, what do you want? What do you want? We're not going to agree, but we want to know what are each of you looking for? And we said, are there any commonalities, which you probably know how to do this? Okay, we agree on this, so let's put these to the side. And here are the difficult issues. You don't want this. Are there any opportunities where this might work? Well, if you get this, then what is the benefit to us? So then you start talking the language. So if we give you this, what is the benefit to the greater community? We know how you benefit because it's economics. But what are you giving us? What are you giving the schools? What are you giving the community centers? Make sense? Again, this is not it's not like a science. I think a lot of it is just trying to figure out what works for the particular community and where can you find those folks that are really passionate about this. And if you do this, I call raving fans. In Charleston, I was there for a project called the Heirs Property Preservation Project, which helps people figure out how to get deeds to their property, how to maintain it. And they rarely go out any longer. They have created about 8 families that have this powerful story that when they step into a room and say, I was about to lose my property, we didn't have the deeds clear, and let me show you how they did this for us, and now we have property that's making money for us. And so if you start doing that with this community that you're in, creating people who can go out and do things for you and have the same conversation, and have a living room conversation, those front porch conversations, over coffee conversations, they're doing the work for you. So you have to be very clear and definitive about what is your message that you want those people to take out, and what is it that they can do to promote it for you. And if you do that right, they'll start doing it for you. Yeah, I don't want to talk all, I mean I could. But. Any questions for me or Rashida?
I didn't hear you say anything about developers giving campaign money to city council members and mayors.
mean, I can't comment. I mean, I can talk about speculation.
Metro Times did a fantastic story, just posted it on my Facebook, about how Dan Gilbert got $1 billion without anybody looking, and they actually listed everybody's campaign contributions. Why that's important is it's not a lot of money. And so I know that you may think like, oh my God, you know, this is like, but it's not a lot of money, except for federal law. But I mean, I don't know how much of that is really what sways them. That's my personal opinion.
They also, every elected official out there loves to talk about jobs. So you're not going to get a lot of people, at least,
I don't know if it's that, really.
I
Want to hear my theory?
Sure.
I think a lot of elected officials like to be Gilbert's boy, which is, you know, like, it's this, like, I know this is weird, but they want to be liked by them. They want to be invited to the suite at Comerica Park. I actually know for a fact one of my state reps in Detroit, it was, and that stuff you've got to look up, that people don't, there's a separate like area where you can look up and see how many dinners and who was paid. And most of them, it won't say Olympia Entertainment, it will say the lobby firm that represents Olympia Entertainment. So there's this idea, like I kept watching a lot of the state senators on the ice in the new Little Caesars Arena, like, oh, you know, they got their own personal tours, little hard hat, you know, and they're liked, and they're like, you know, they don't realize Gilbert's going to drop their ass as soon as they're out of office. Like, they don't give a shit about you. Like, if you have daddy issues, go figure that out. You know what I mean? So don't be waiting and praying, oh my God, Chris will adjust my boy, he knows me, I can call him for, you know. Though I think there's a lot of that going on, especially in local politics. Sometimes community members with that titles, people that are neighbors run for office and they get there, and somehow they fall into this like weird kind of world where they think, I want to go to that, I want to do that, and it's just it's glamorous and no, and all I do, you know, a lot of my colleagues, I still see them, and they're at the game in the suites that's catered, and they're, you know, getting tickets to, I think they gave tickets out to Jay-Z concert once, and all this kind of stuff. So I just want you to know though, so sometimes it's not the direct contribution or any of that, and I don't think it's like, I want to be able to go in my community and say I created jobs. I don't think it's that fancy. I really think it's you know, but I'll tell you, making out Gilbert and Illich and working really hard these days, all of us are, in getting stories about the broken promises. Not that we hate them because they're billionaires. No, you promised something to us in exchange, and guess what? We had to close 38 schools in, or 36 schools in Detroit. And don't tell me that that wasn't, you know, all of this kind of shifting away from public funding our public needs is, you know, that's the problem. So it just means we had to work a little bit harder so that fancy other stuff is not going to be the reason that they, you know, they want to go be like, you should, you know, it might take a couple cycles to get that to be like very unpopular for anybody to vote for corporate welfare in your city. And I promise you, because I look, Coleman Young got $500 from Matty Maroon, and he still voted for that stupid ass the bridge. So $500 is not what got him. It's because, you know, he wanted to be Matty Maroon's humble way, you know. It's true. And it's mostly the men, but that's just mine.
No, I think there's a lot of validity to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, I do. As the alert, and it's a phenomenon that really
Oh my God.
occurs in
Walks in
so
the room
many
and they're like,
different paradigms. It's not, I mean, what you just outlined is something that enacts itself time and time again. It's not like some far off fantasy. I mean, that's like, it's like the allure of the mucky mutts.
So we, no, it's true, and we were in Bend this last, we were fighting Matty Maroon, who's the billionaire that owns the bridge, and we did this community tour to show, like, look, the expansion, what it's done. He owns all these abandoned houses, he's not doing anything. And at the end, we didn't know this, but Matty Maroon himself showed up. The residents themselves were like, can I take a picture with you?
You know, but they're the same ones that are blocking trucks with me out in the street. You know what I'm saying? So there is something psychological that's going on there that I think we're not accounting for, because we do dehumanize our city council members and not realize, no, they're human, they want to, you know, yeah.
Well, I think those roots actually initiate at a much younger level. It's part of our institutionalization of education, workplace.
Indoctrination.
Oh, yeah.
So what most individuals, I deal with, I'm in labor and I deal with that type of scenario. And the advantage that the salary managers who everybody wants to be buddies with, oh yeah, I'm buddies with the plant manager, it's just a form of opinion. They really don't give them anything. Behind their back in a closed door, they're going to talk about it.
I know.
But the individuals don't see it. But when you go into the room and you ignore their status and you address them as you would yourself in the mirror, they're caught off guard. They're completely caught off guard. So if you're able to get individuals that could approach these individuals and set the example in front of those that are trying to placate them,
Yeah.
then maybe you could turn the tide.
That's a good point.
I just think we need to really outwork that. Does that make sense? So we just need to get out there and show how just jacked up it is and how it's going to hurt us. Because I'll promise you, if you have kids now, like 10 years down the line, we're going to be still paying for something that's not, you know, that's on the ground now. That
Yeah, well,
people just want that instant shovel ready. Let's do it. It's great. It's an arena, Rashida. It's hockey. I'm like, how many black people have you seen at a hockey game? You know, like we're 80% African American city. You know, stop like making it out. He's fine at Joe Louis. Have him rehab that. Instead, now they're going to tear it down, and now he's got a monopoly on an entertainment center in the city. He doesn't want any competing. Like, we can't even have concerts. They're going to tear it down. I mean, it's crazy. Anyways, I could go on and on, but I
So part of the question is,
That needs to wrap up.
this is where I am personally, not necessarily through the platform, but so we have this thing that people rally against and say we don't want it, but it's here. It's open, it's making money, there are people going there in droves. So now what do you do with that?
Right.
We had this big thing, we don't want it, but it's here, so people have learned this thing, it's called learned obsolescence, learned helplessness. I've learned that when I do this, it doesn't matter. But then you have to start bringing up other examples, like I brought up of this project in Detroit that when the residents pushed back, even though the lease was signed, it's not a done deal anymore. So what does it look like to say that thing is there, I still don't like it, how do you make that known? I don't have any strategies for that. So what does the community do about it?
We have to have this place
Thank you.
cleaned up soon. But thanks everybody for coming, and we're going to continue these conversations too. So, you know, especially if you're on the DSE email list. Otherwise, we want to keep building on this. And let's give a round of applause to Rashida.